Welcome and shalom. My name is Al, and this is our second part series of Matthew 24, Israel, the fig tree, and the signs of our times. I would like to do a quick summary on what we had talked about yesterday. Here we're looking at the old city of Jerusalem. We're standing on the Mount of Olives looking eastward. There's a big valley that goes down like this and back up. And there's actually a mountain that runs like this, and it goes and goes and up and just out of the city to the north. So that's north and south. I would like to take my marker here and show you a little bit more accurately how the topography of the land would go. It's something like this. And we know that from Genesis 22, Abraham was told to come to the land of Moriah and sacrifice his son Isaac. He was living in Beersheba, south of here at the time. And time he got here, the city wasn't here, nobody was here, except for the mountain and himself. So what he does, he goes here, and what does he do? The same thing that he was told to do, to sacrifice his son. So this is called Moriah, and it means in Hebrew, the mountain of Yahweh. The mountain of Yahweh. And he comes here, and of course, he's about to sacrifice his son, and the angel says to him, wait, don't do it. I know that you love me. Of course, it's a shadow picture for the bigger picture later down the line. But for now, the area is discovered. We don't pick it up again until Moses, almost 500 years later, is taking the Israelites out of Egypt. By the way, next week is Passover. And in Deuteronomy 12:5, Yahweh says to Moses, when you get to the promised land, I will tell you the place to set my name. Now we go 500 more years down the line, and we come to King David, who will build his, or should I say, take over the city from the Jebusites here and call it his city, or the city of David, the city of David. And moving along, Satan comes along, because who else is he going to tempt? Who knows the name of the Father? Only the Israelites. So David is tempted by Satan to number Israel, because he's very concerned how many men he can put in the field against the Philistines, which live over to the west, which are continuously attacking Israel. However, what happens is he doesn't depend upon Yahweh for the victory, and this is his sin. And in the process, because of not believing in the Father, which is his life, and thereby the life of Israel, 70,000 Israelis will fall because of this. What is to be done? The Father sends his seer, his prophet to David, named Gad, and Gad says, we have to do something. Sacrifice on the threshing floor of Onan, the Jebusite, which just happens to be right here. Now, it is what we call a threshing floor. What is threshing? Can most of you relate to that today? I don't think so. You harvest grain, could be rice, could be wheat, and you beat the heck out of it, and you separate the outside husk from the edible grain inside. The husk is of no use. The grain is what you make your bread out, which is your life. It's the name of Bethlehem, house of bread. All right, so because of this, we get in the word Hebrew, the Hebrew word Kodesh. Kodesh. And in Hebrew, it's spelled in the old pictographs like this. Kodesh. And this is where we get our Q from in our alphabet. And it means the back of something, the back of the head. And this portion means holy, it means to thresh. And what comes from threshing is holy. So David was beaten up by the father. He says, forgive me for my sin. And the father, what? Forgives him. But he first had to come to that realization. He does that, and the benefit of this is the very place that Moses had talked about is now identified, and thereby the name of Yahweh can be placed here. So what is he going to do with this? Well, he wants to glorify it. He wants to raise it. He wants to put it in everybody's face. And the father says, I appreciate your heart, but it's not for you to build me the house. Your son will build the house for my name. And it's in this respect that Solomon is now coming on the scene. And we pick this up in 2 Chronicles chapter 6. And it says this, and he said, blessed be Yahweh, the Almighty of Israel, who has with his hands fulfilled that which he spoke with his mouth to my father David, saying, since the day that I brought forth my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose no city among the tribes of Israel to build a house in, that my name might be there. Neither chose I any man to be a ruler over my people Israel. But I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name might be there, and have David over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of David my father to build a house for the name of the Almighty for Israel. But Yahweh said to David, my father, for as much as it has been in thy heart to build a house for my name, that thou shalt not build. Notwithstanding, thou shalt not build the house, but thy son, which shall come forth out of your loins, he shall build the house for my name. Notice the shadow picture of Yeshua, Yehoshua, down the line. Okay, so Solomon builds the house for the name of Yahweh. You might be wondering, what is my angle? What is my point in all of this? And it's this. We go to verse 32 of the same chapter, and it says this, moreover, concerning the stranger, that's me, which is not of thy people Israel, but is come from a far country for the great name's sake, and thy mighty hand, and thy stretched out arm, if they come and pray in this house, then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, and do to all the according that the stranger calleth for thee, for that all the people of the earth may know thy name, and fear thee, and as does Israel, my people, and may know that this house which I have built is called by my name, the house of Yahweh. Continuing with our presentation, I believe it's important to let everybody know a little bit of history about this, because we want to zero in on what we believe the house of Yahweh precisely stood. We're looking here again from the Mount of Olives looking out. We're standing here on top looking down. This is the Muslims' Dome of the Rock right here. Harim el Sharif over here. This is their Al Aqsa Mosque. The Jewish West Wall is on the other side of the Temple Mount. And there is a road that goes below us right here, and it comes up over here. But we're really not looking at a uncut version here as we are here. Today there's a road that comes down like this, and the actual city of David has been cut off from this. But you can see that it would have been continuously following the mountain if the road wasn't here. And the same thing can be said over here. Once we leave the city over here to the north, this is called the Damascus Gate, which faces north. And this is Golgotha, where Yeshua, Jesus, was crucified. But today there's a big road going through here, out and up over here. So I want to now take you, after showing this, on safari and take a closer look at both sides of this to get a perspective on where the house of Yahweh really stood. And the reason I'm saying this is because it has to be on Moriah, which is this. But what is taking place today on the internet is many people are coming out with some very far-fetched ideas where the house of Yahweh was. Way over here, and it's actually leading to disinformation. So I believe it's an important topic. So follow me as we take a look at some closer slides further north and further south on the temple. Now, we are now looking at the Damascus Gate from the exterior. This elaborate architecture was commissioned and built by Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan of the Ottoman Turks, about 1600. Allegedly, he had a dream that God told him to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and so he sent his workmen, paid for it, came down to the city and rebuilt most of the walls a little bit cheaper than the old Heronian form, which used very, very big blocks. And we see this when we go to the west wall on the other side of the city. Either way, looking at it from here, that window over the main entry, sometimes you have an Israeli soldier in there, and you could talk to him. He's very friendly because you can take tours of the city walls. You just pay a nominal fee and you go up there and you walk around. You can make a half a day at it if you know what you're talking about. The seeming bridge that leads into the doorway itself, if you notice to the left, there's another entryway which you can't see to the right, but there's two of them there. And that's from a much, much older doorway, still called the Damascus Gate, only this was built by the Roman Emperor Hadrian after the second Jewish revolt in 135 CE, Common Era. The history of this place is just amazing, and if you are a novice archaeologist, you just go nuts at this place. Either way, I used to have a book, and in that book I had pictures from the original cameras, and this would have been one of the pictures. It's the same gate we're looking at, only this is the Turkish period, and you can see how the Ottomans didn't pay too much respect to the city in relation to embellishing it. Matter of fact, I heard that they used to tax people depending upon how many trees they had in the land. And so, of course, the people would burn their trees down and they'd pay less. But what would happen to the soil, it would be eroding and creating a lot of dust. And here it certainly looks like they just really let it go. Either way, Moriah, that extends from the southern part of the city, is just to our left-hand side, about 100 yards down the road. And in 1870s, the famous British general, General Gordon, I don't know whether he was a general at that time, but he was stationed in Jerusalem, and he was looking out over the walls, and being a Christian, he noticed this very interesting rock formation. And it's General Gordon that we can ascribe what we now call the real site of Golgotha. And the Protestants will later take this and run with it, and this is what we know as the Garden Tomb, which is to our left. And archaeologists through the years have come to see that it really is the garden, the working plot where Yeshua was entombed, because it has the tomb. The stone is gone, but the track where the massive stone rolled over is still there today. Whereas the traditional Christian, Orthodox and Christians want to believe that is in the Holy Sepulchre, which is today in the middle of the city. I'd like to say this first, that Constantine, when he became the so-called Christian emperor of Rome, he gave his mother a blank check, and she went to the Middle East, and she just happened to find exactly where Yeshua was crucified. She also found exactly where he was born in Bethlehem, and she also found exactly where Moses received the Ten Commandments, and she built major churches over each one of these. But the one that really gives it away is in Sinai, because that certainly isn't it, because it tells us that Mount Sinai, where Moses, Horeb, received the Ten Commandments, is in Arabia, which we call Saudi Arabia today. Either way, religion has its way, but archaeology has a tendency to come back and show us a lot more. And so if you appreciate this, Israel certainly is the place to be. Now, our next slide is quite interesting. It brings us to the same picture, only now we have the Palestinian bus station here. And on top of it is Moriah. That is Moriah. And so the crucifixion would have taken place right here, the place of the skull. And why? Because it's the same road that went to Damascus, goes up to the new part of Jerusalem today, down to the Kidron Valley. And if you're going to crucify anybody, it's a good place to do it here, because everybody gets to see him. Either way, now let's take a look at the other extreme end of Moriah on the south side of the city of David. Okay, we're now south of the city of David, and we've come to another geographical extreme, and it's a big valley, and it's called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. In Hebrew, Yehoshaphat, and the translation on that is the final judgment of Yahweh. How appropriate, just south of the house himself. And whose judgment could this be? Only the Father's. For when the second coming of Messiah takes place and the Mount of Olives splits in two, as we read in Zechariah 14, what does Yeshua say? As he's told us again and again, sheep to my right and goats to my left. Yes, you understand that. This is an older version of it. I would say this would be about 1912, 1950, because we see the structure to the right about 2 o'clock. That was actually called the Domitian Abbey. It was built by the Kaiser, German Kaiser. Why? Because he was befriending the Ottoman Turks. He needed them in World War I. And finally, we come to the house of Yahweh itself. And this is what a lot of us have in mind, what it had to have looked like. It certainly would have been a major complex, and the detail and the beauty surrounding this is just overwhelming. However, we have a problem, and that is when we think of maps, we see maps in almost all your Bibles, and even massive model scaled down cities of Jerusalem, from the Holy Land Hotel in Jerusalem to the Holy Land exhibit in Orlando, Florida. It almost always depicts it something like this. Very succinct, very tight, and what gives it away as not being realistic is at the upper right-hand corner we have the Antonia Fortress, which was the Roman garrison to monitor and control the Jews, of course. The problem being, though, we know that the 8th Legion that was stationed in Jerusalem was composed of at least 6,000 men with another 3,000 to 4,000 auxiliary personnel in order to maintain their infrastructure. And thereby, they could never possibly fit in this small little model of the Antonia Fortress. And thereby, what we have come to see over the last 5 years, and I know this is very controversial, that what I showed you earlier, the Muslims' Harim el-Sharif with the Muslims' Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that in reality, that whole Temple Mount area was the Antonia Fortress. They had their own camps up there, their own infrastructure, markets. They didn't come in contact with the Jews. The Jews were there to be milked only for taxes, because Pax Romana was all about simply don't revolution and pay your taxes, a little bit like it is today. There is a ministry called Yahweh's Restoration Ministry, and they do a very great summary in a YouTube video called The Lost Temple Mount. And here they superimpose it, and where is it? In the city of David, not on the Muslims' Temple Mount area, which is to the right of the second man to the right, but here is where it stands. And so it's in this respect that this is important for the days that we're heading into. And again, what archaeology and scripture has to say compared to what people prefer to believe is always two different things. So you decide what you like.